Hi, I'm Peter Chan, National Weather Service Program Lead of the Alaska Weather Show, and I have a very important change notice to share with you. If you haven't already heard, the last TV broadcast of Alaska weather, at least in the traditional sense, over the airwaves, will be on Friday, June 30th. Starting on July 1st, the National Weather Service will provide a modified web-based version of the program on a new YouTube channel. We will be moving on YouTube from the Alaska Public Media site to @NWS Alaska, so you can go ahead and subscribe to this channel ahead of time. A public comment period remains open through July 30th, so please send your comments and concerns to nws.service-change-comments@noaa.gov. If you have any additional questions, you may reach carrie.haisley@noaa.gov and donald.moore@noaa.gov. We thank you for your patience and understanding.
Okay, welcome to this Saturday's show. Up first, on the fire danger chart here, we've got, for grass, areas of very high fire danger, again, continuing upper Yukon Valley, right up across the Brooks Range there into the eastern North Slope, and some areas back to the northwest toward the central North Slope there, also crossing the Brooks Range. And not too bad here in the interior. A couple areas here just north of the Alaska Range and to the northwest there, some very high fire danger. Also in the Copper River Basin, some high fire danger there. Otherwise, medium out here over the Seward Peninsula and inland a ways there. Not too bad, though, elsewhere. And for spruce, even better. Still very high fire danger, quite an area there over the Yukon Flats, and medium up along the North Slope, as well as getting pretty spotty now. Mostly low across the remainder of the state. Couple of higher areas there in the central interior, north of the Alaska Range up toward Nenana and that area, and then a little bit back here northwest of the mountains. And from there, looking at the hazardous weather graphic, there's a wind advisory out, goes into effect at midnight tonight until midnight Sunday night for the Alaska Range, passes for gusty winds, 25 with sustained 25 to 35 miles an hour, possible gusts as high as 65 miles an hour. And that's again for after midnight tonight through tomorrow and through tomorrow evening. Satellite imagery showing pretty good storm winding up here south of the Alaska Peninsula, moving northward. The front spreading wind and rain into Kodiak Island, moisture into Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. Pretty good thunderstorms developing here over the central and eastern interior during the afternoon hours. The temperatures rising into the 70s, in some cases lower 80s up over the Yukon Flats, triggering that convection, and that kind of sliding off to the northwest with lightning strikes farther to the west and northwest in these two brighter areas of clouds. Also some rain with a weak trough moving into the northern panhandle along the North Gulf Coast today. Pretty significant rain, anywhere from a half inch to 3/4 of an inch falling in some areas there, like around Yakutat, and low pressure spinning there just north of or northeast of Atka Island, keeping a lot of clouds and showers out over the Bering Sea. Otherwise, rolling this through again, see some pretty good sunshine out over the eastern Brooks Range, actually right out to the eastern Arctic coast, but some fog around St. Lawrence Island. Pueblos had half-mile in fog at times today with some light rain, fog, and drizzles. That front moved northward. And again, this system, the stronger front coming northward here toward Kodiak Island. We'll see tonight that brings gale force winds into the Barren Islands, North Gulf Coast, or at least the western North Gulf Coast later on for the eastern North Gulf Coast. It'll last through tomorrow afternoon. And into Prince William Sound, that'll bring gale force winds in eventually. And a good shot of rain, gusty winds across southern Alaska here, especially through the passes, mountain pass areas from the southeast. Areas of rain into the Bering Sea, and then for tomorrow, that front really weakens as it moves inland and breaks up as the low center pulls back to the northwest to about this position, starts weakening. Periods of rain will continue for the North Gulf Coast, but winds will be coming down considerably later in the afternoon tomorrow. Scattered thunderstorms over the interior once again, and some rain pushing into the northern panhandle. A little bit farther south tomorrow, maybe even some showers down in toward Misty Fjords area. Basically a dry day, at least by comparison, in the afternoon for Kodiak Island, and showers along the Alaska Peninsula, followed by more shower activity. Kodiak, south of Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, low here just southwest of the Pribilof Islands, keeping showers along the southwest coast. Otherwise, partly to mostly sunny to start the day with, and then afternoon showers and thunderstorms developing again over the interior, especially over the mountainous terrain. Mostly just showers for the Alaska Range, and stays kind of damp there for the eastern North Gulf Coast and northern Panhandle with lower flying conditions. A trough brings some showers to the eastern Arctic coast. And for lows tonight, upper 40s to lower 50s. And for the highs tomorrow, mid-60s inland areas, and in the 50s to mid-60s for the Panhandle, followed by lows about the same, upper 40s to lower 50s, so a little bit cooler than tonight. And then highs on Monday, still in the 60s, not many 70s showing up. Copper River Basin, a couple areas might push 70, but otherwise 50s and 60s. Up north, lows 50s and 30s for the Arctic coast, followed by highs tomorrow, mid to upper 70s in the east, lower 70s as you head west, and then 60s out toward the Seward Peninsula, followed by lows again in the 40s and 50s, 30s for the Arctic coast, North Slope, and highs 70 to 75. So cooler yet for the eastern interior areas. Fairbanks down into the 60s, 40s for the Arctic coast. Out to the southwest, lows tonight in the lower 40s for the Aleutians and along the coast, maybe a little warmer for the Alaska Peninsula. Highs tomorrow, upper 40s to mid-50s, most areas. Lower 40s, though, for St. Lawrence Island. And then lows, upper 30s, St. Lawrence Island, otherwise in the 40s. And then the highs on Monday afternoon, lower to mid-50s for the southwest coast, mid-40s for St. Lawrence Island, near 50 for the Pribilofs, and upper 40s to lower 50s for the Aleutians. Alaska Peninsula in the upper 40s, some cases mid-50s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Sunday morning's line weather graphic looking something like this. We've got IFR in the forecast along the Arctic coast here into the Chukchi Sea, southward through the Bering Strait, onto the north coast of the Seward Peninsula, covering just about all of the northern Bering Sea here up to the west coast of Novak Island, Pribilofs, on down into the west central Aleutians. Marginal VFR, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, into Bristol Bay and inland there, almost into the southern Kuskokwim Valley, Kodiak Island, and along the eastern southern slopes of the Alaska Range. And then some more IFR here, North Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound, and east side of Kenai Peninsula, most of the southeast coast. Good VFR in the interior, holds through the afternoon up in the central interior here, as well as the north slope, and some improvement with the IFR pulling off the Arctic coast, also breaking up here through the Bering Strait to St. Lawrence Island and covering the northern Bering Sea. Marginal VFR, it looks like here for the Aleutians and southern Bering, some VFR in Bristol Bay breaking out, as well as southern, southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak, Kachemak Bay area. Otherwise Kodiak marginal. IFR lingering along the portions of the North Gulf Coast. Good improvement over the Panhandle, although staying marginal VFR in most areas. And for the morning Monday, again, the interior staying pretty good, as well as the North Slope, Eastern Brooks Range. IFR mostly off the Arctic coast actually there. Some areas could see it come on shore briefly at times. IFR continues Lynn Canal Glacier Bay up to about Yakutat and along the coast of the Panhandle, better conditions inland. And for the Bering Sea, still a big area IFR, St. Lawrence Island covering the east central Bering Sea, also back to the west a little bit, leaving the Aleutians mostly marginal except for Unamak Island, could go marginal to IFR at times there. Areas of marginal VFR and IFR here for the North Gulf Coast and across southern Alaska, and maybe a little band there along the Brooks Range that tends to persist through the afternoon. Otherwise, the interior stays VFR, North Slope, same thing. IFR farther off the Arctic coast now Monday afternoon. pretty good areas of IFR over the Bering Sea, but north of the Aleutians, so staying occasionally marginal there up to Kodiak Island, southern Alaska, marginal VFR in areas, Copper River Basin, not looking too bad. And for the area from just near Yakutat, northern Panhandle, staying IFR, and along the coast. Passes, both Annatoof and Canadigan, looking pretty good tomorrow. VFR for both passes, either entrance. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR at times, especially on the eastern entrances. Same thing for Rainy. And for Windy, southern approach, marginal VFR into the pass, but VFR north side. And for Isabel, same thing, lowest conditions, the pass and south, better to the north. Mentasta, optimistically looking at a VFR day for that pass. And for Tanita, marginal VFR in the eastern entrance and into the pass. That's where the lowest conditions will be. Portage starting out IFR, improving through the afternoon, but probably staying marginal at times toward evening. And for Chilkoot and White, IFR. Looking at the freezing levels here, northeast part of the state into Canada, 10,000 feet, and about 7,000 to 8,000 feet here along the North Gulf Coast off to the southwest there, and either side of 10,000 feet there over the Panhandle. A little cooler, that upper level low here over the eastern central Aleutians down to about 4,000 feet there. And from freezing levels going to icing. Pretty good area here at some point in the day tomorrow, seeing some, at least a chance of some isolated moderate rime icing or mixed here over the interior. This area under the southwest flow, any icing there would probably, with that system, would be of the rime variety, with possible isolated moderate there as well along the coast of the Panhandle up to the North Gulf Coast, maybe into south central Alaska as well. And for the jet stream, upper level low here at 33,000 feet, just west of Cape Newenham. So that puts a good south-southwesterly flow right up into southern Alaska across the Gulf and into the interior there and the northern Panhandle. Looking at 9,000 feet, pretty good flow here, south-southwest, 45 to as high as 50 knots south of the Alaska Peninsula, penetrating right into the central interior and then branching off to the west there. And 3,000 feet, about the same pattern. Turbulence, moderate turbulence here, southern Alaska, down into the Kuskokwim Valley, Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula.
We can't just put the fires out because we can't put them out. We've tried that now for a century, and it doesn't work. It just makes the next one worse.
You may see a place like this and think, total devastation. And it's not your fault for thinking that.
But that depiction is, as we've learned from countless experts over the last 2 weeks, not the whole story, and not how you should think about wildfires.
The truth is, there are lots of types of habitats out west, and fire affects them all in unique ways. So it's important to start thinking about the big picture with wildland fires. So let's first rewind. To help us understand what's going on out west, Rob and I started calling up the experts, and what we found was that the story of fire, particularly in the west, is complex. So to understand it, we planned a road trip.
Road trip time.
The goal of our road trip was to see as many forests as we could and meet experts around the region to help us understand the role fire plays out here. First destination was to find the forest burned by the now famous Great Fires of 1910. And at the heart of what is known as the Big Blow-Up, the logical first place to stop, the city of Wallace.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
How's the day going?
Good. Haley and I are in this cute town of Wallace, Idaho, which was completely destroyed by the 1910 fires. You can see how much damage this fire actually did. Let's send up the drone and see what the surroundings look like now. What we found was a small town surrounded by a dense forest, with every single tree just over 100 years old.
So everything we see behind us now, that's all new growth since 1910.
And to help us put these historic fires and the forests around Wallace in perspective, we met up with historian Diane Smith.
This is Wallace, and here are your fires.
All of this is the 1910 fires.
This is not that unusual. The fact is, it just was at a time in our development as a country. We noticed it, we paid attention to it, and we got the national attention for it.
Right. As it turns out, these fires helped reinforce the idea at the time that every fire needed to be suppressed at all costs. And this suppression for so long has led to new problems, namely thick forests full of fuel. But don't just take my word for it. Let me show you the difference. Notice how different this place is than this one that has been thinned out quite heavily in the past, or like an area like this that's been burnt quite frequently. In fact, both of these areas show how many forests would have looked in the past under regular burns. The dead and low-growing material gets consumed easily by fire, very much unlike this forest, which has had fire suppression for over 100 years and could lead to a high-intensity fire.
And all of this dry, dead material, that's problematic.
So we went looking for a big fire and just followed the smoke. Oh gosh, a huge crown fire. I gotta get this. These high-intensity fires aren't great because in many forests they kill all the trees over a large area, even in forests that used to be very resistant to frequent fires. And nobody knows that better than the people that work in this particular forest.
There's green coming back, and I guess I've gotten somewhat used to it, and I still have hope that the entire Sierra Nevadas won't look like this, that we can maybe get ahead of it. So the fires nowadays can move from the surface right into the tree canopies really easily, where in the past, fires would have kept trees pruned, they would have kept fuel densities low, and so now you end up with a lot more high severity fires in the West than had a fire regime kept under its historic recurrence. This to me is more a lesson of fire exclusion and keeping fire out of the system. If we're keeping it out of when it would burn with a beneficial effect, it will burn, and the probability of it burning at an unbeneficial state is higher.
So again, this is where it's complicated. We thought if only we could stop the fires, we'd win the fight. But the fires like the King Fire here show that stopping the fires only made it worse. Add that to the fact that we're living closer than ever to these wild lands. So to help us understand the wildland-urban interface, we met up with CAL FIRE. And as we were pulling up to this neighborhood, one of the residents quickly came out to tell us about the latest fire.
Yeah, our biggest fear is fire. It was very scary. I mean, everybody was honking and get out, and there's a fire.
This is the risk across California. The response piece alone isn't going to solve this challenge if the homeowners aren't organized.
Because we're all in the same boat. One match away from everybody losing everything. It's a real fear.
Literally, we could have that fire spread up in here within a matter of seconds.
Wow.
California is going to have fires. We're not going to stop all the fires in California, so we have to have an infrastructure that's fire resistant. We need to work on policies that help us engage in active management of our forest. That's using prescribed fire as a tool. It's all the things in the toolbox. It's a combination of managing our forest and a combination of protecting our communities that are in it.
If it wasn't complicated enough, this made it very clear that you can't just let the fires burn whenever they start. The forests need to be managed to help mitigate the risk to us. But using fire seems to be one of the keys to making things safer, and knowing the science behind fire is always key to implementing good management. Fire Sciences Lab, right over here. So we made a stop at the Missoula Fire Lab to try to understand what we know about fire.
You see the flames at the very top and how they're sticking to the slope?
They really are. Everybody's laying down.
They're laying down. Well, that's flame attachment. Actually a very difficult thing to understand.
Here at the Fire Lab, the scientists study the basics of fire. Understanding the complexities here helps firefighters and forest managers in the field better predict and fight wildland fires.
Fires are inevitable. The only choices that we really have is what kind of fire to have and when do we want it. And that's it. Almost? Ready. You're ready. Jason's ready.
Mark's team is prepping to light a huge bed of precisely cut cardboard.
You're not going to be in any danger. So when the lights go out, don't move. Gasoline.
This is one of many experiments they'll run to understand the physics of fire, how it moves, how it spreads, and all of this measured by precise scientific instruments and high-speed cameras. tens of thousands of pieces of cardboard up in flames in mere seconds. The ongoing research will help us better understand fire with the ultimate goal that we can live better with it. But can we do that? There is one forest we knew of that seems to have figured out this coexistence with fire, a place where fires burn all summer, every summer. It's part of their way of life and a mentality we wanted to know about. And here we went out with our guides Frank Lake and Steve Valentine, who work with the local U.S. Forest Service and tribe to help keep a healthy forest. This is perfect. The fire's basically come through and cleared out the understory, and all that's left are the trees.
Yeah, it's black and it's charred, and you just see a few of the earliest sprouts, but you come back in here a year, it's going to be alive again.
And to many, this may seem destroyed, but they view it differently here.
That fire's medicine, because it's not if it comes, it's when it comes. We need fire, and fire needs us.
You see, fire needs people to remind us how important fire is to the ecosystem. Frank and Steve's ancestors have been burning this forest for millennia. It's now part of what makes the forest special. They just want to make sure that it's not forgotten.
Basically, what you leave behind is what's important.
When they say this is your foods and your medicines, your sacred places, your springs, your water, that's essential, that's who we are as people. We have to learn to live with fire. We have to learn to respect fire. We have to maintain that security. That's why I do what I do.
Haley and I have learned a lot on our journey. We've learned that fire is complicated, and it's not as black and white as we make it out to be, and it is an integral part of our forests. They've had fire running through them for thousands of years, and they will continue to have fire in them in the future. And we can't always put the fires out. We have to decide what kind of fires to live with, and that is why we need to work with these fire crews from around the country. We also need a public who understands the importance of fire on the landscape. A healthy forest, you see, is a forest that lives with fire.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Coastal water forecast for the South Coast Sunday. West-southwest winds 10 to 15 knots, seas at about 4 to 5 feet. Central coast here, south at 20, and then the north coast, small craft advisories, east-southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, with seas running 7 to 12 feet. Lincoln Island Glacier Bay, south winds at 20 knots, seas 4 feet. South winds 15 knots for Stevens Passage, northwest 15 for Clarence Strait. And then for Monday, along the south coast, southerlies at 15 to 20 knots, central coast southeast at 20, sea 6 to 7 feet. And for the north coast, east winds at 15 knots. Otherwise, the inside waters looking pretty uniform. Southeast, light though, at about 10 knots, with seas running 2 feet for Clarence Strait, Stevens Passage, Lincoln Island Glacier Bay. And for the North Gulf Coast, at least the eastern North Gulf Coast, actually tonight gale warnings will be coming up and covering all the North Gulf Coast, especially here in the west. Then tomorrow afternoon, the gales will be mostly over toward the eastern North Gulf Coast. Prince William Sound as well, southeast 35 knots in the forecast. There were seas up to 8 feet. Otherwise, coming down to 25 knots for the western North Gulf Coast, seas around 10 feet. Barren Islands, south winds 30 knots, 10-foot seas, southeast 30 for Kamishak Bay, and southeast 25, southern Cook Inlet, northern Cook Inlet, east at 20 knots with 5-foot seas. And for the day on Monday, much lighter winds, light variable winds, 10 knots here for the North Gulf Coast, seas 5 to 6 feet. Same thing for Prince William Sound, winds becoming light and variable with seas subsiding down to 2 feet. Cook Inlet, variable winds, 10 knots, maybe more of a northeast direction south of the Forelands, but still pretty light, and seas coming down to 1 to 2 feet. And for the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay areas, southeast winds, 20 knots, seas 5 feet. Kodiak Island tomorrow, small craft advisory, south winds 25 to 30 knots. Alaska Peninsula, south winds at 20 knots, seas 3 to 7 feet. Bristol Bay, south winds at 20 knots. For Monday, Bristol Bay, southeast at 20. The Alaska Peninsula, south to southeast, 15 to 20 knots. And for Kodiak Island, looking at east-southeasterlies at about 15. And for the eastern Aleutians for Sunday, Tomorrow, looks like west-southwesterlies, 15 to 20 knots there. About the same for Adak and Atka, west at 15 knots, 3 to 4 foot seas. And then north to northwest winds, 15 knots here for the western Aleutians with seas right around 4 feet. And then for Monday, westerly winds take over here for the western Aleutians at about 20 knots, and then west-southwest 20 for Adak and Atka. Unimak Island looking at small craft advisories, west 25 knots, and then back down to 20 knots from a west-southwesterly direction there for Alaska Island. And for the southwest coast, here for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, northeast, 15 knots for Sunday. Kuskokwim Delta coast, south of 20, seas 3 feet. Light variable winds for the Pribilof Islands. Small craft advisories, north winds 25 knots for St. Matthew Island with seas right around 5 feet. And for the day Monday, for the Pribilofs, westerlies at 15 knots. And weak low pressure right through here. So southeast 20 here for the area south of Nunivak Island becomes east at 20 for the Yukon Delta coast, and then northeast at 20 there for St. Matthew Island. Norton Sound looking mostly from the southeast at 15 knots. St. Lawrence Island east at 15 knots with 3 foot seas. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, east winds 15 knots, north 15 on the central coast. North at 10 there for the western Arctic coast. Chukchi Sea northerlies 15 to 20 knots. And for Monday, Chukchi Sea south to southeast 15 to 20 knots and seas maybe up to 4 feet. East at 15 knots western Arctic coast, central coast northeast at 15, and then west-southwest 15 here for the east side. And for tonight, pretty strong front coming up into the Gulf of Alaska and then making landfall along the North Gulf Coast sometime late tonight. Gale warnings along in advance of that front, and again pushing into Prince William Sound with a pretty good shot of rain, especially along the North Gulf Coast, beginning to taper off Kodiak Island. Tomorrow, that front really weakens and breaks up as it moves inland, so conditions improving down here. A little bit better chance of rain in the Panhandle. And for Monday, a little drier, but still scattered afternoon showers and thunderstorms.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.